This is Rachel, founder of Pulse for Purpose. And as you know, a part of what we do is we highlight amazing human beings who are really stepping up and living in their purpose and doing awesome things in our communities. Joining me today is a very special person, Rashida Ricketts. She is the founder and host of Grace to Garden podcast, among other things, which we'll get into. Before we delve into that, just tell everyone a little bit more about yourself.
Yes. So again, thank you, Rachel, for bringing me in this space. This is exciting and just an honor to be able to share the space with you because you're doing really important and incredible work. And so just to be able to have this time to just talk with you, share the space, it's so amazing. So thank you again. But as Rachel mentioned, I'm Rashida. Nice to meet you guys. I am, as she mentioned, the founder and host of Grace to Gardens podcast and producer of Grace to Gardens podcast. I have other projects that I work on that are directly related. And I think maybe later in the episode, we'll talk exactly about like the idea behind my podcast. So I won't spoil that if that's a question for later. But I have other projects that I do that are intersected with the work of my podcast. So it's just trying to figure out a balance between what I really, really enjoy and work that I think is really, really important.
Yeah.
And I started figuring that out. I started my podcast in 2020. And since then, well, I took a quick break, which I think we'll probably talk about too in the part like later on in this conversation. But
Yeah.
in that time, I've been able to figure out like what is it that I'm most passionate about and what is it that I feel or what communities that I feel I can make the most impact in and I feel drawn to. And I
Yeah.
figured out a way to do that. And so I just feel really blessed to be able to do the work that I'm doing now. I'm from New Jersey, so I live in New Jersey, but I went to school at Parsons to get my master's. I cannot
Nice.
say. But I went to Parsons for my master's. And so I lived in New York for 2 years. Fortunately, I was born in New York. So that's a fun fact about me. And yeah, I just love like peace, quiet, calmness, and um, just trying to find a balance each and every day. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Nice. We're on the same page with wanting the peace and quiet. Like
Yeah,
that's a big thing for me.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And I love Parsons. I always love being in that area of the city.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So, actually first let's start by talking about how you came up with the name of your podcast because that's a very unique name.
Yeah, so the name came about honestly, it wasn't even me, like, I can't even take credit for that, that was literally I'm a very spiritual person, I believe in God,
Mhm.
I'm a Christian, I believe in Christ, and it was funny, so my sister, she had heard this song, and she kept trying to press me to listen to it, and I don't know what was going on with me at the time, but I was, like, very much, like, always on autopilot, like, trying to do work, get things done, so I was like,
Mhm.
listen to it, I'll listen to it. I hadn't listened to it, but my sister was trying to get me to listen to this song, and I was on autopilot, like trying to get things done. And it was actually during that break that I had mentioned not too long ago, where I had started my podcast in 2020. I had taken
Yeah.
a break, and then I'm trying to figure things out before I relaunched in this year in 2022.
Mhm.
And I honestly think it might have been in like the end of 2021 where my sister finally got me to sit down to listen to this song.
Wow.
Listen to it, yeah, and then when I listened to it, it just clicked because I had always been thinking about, like, what I wanted to do with the name because the name that I had originally, it was taken up by every other person, like, there were
Right.
other names out there already, so I was like, "I can't really have that," especially as a new podcaster, like,
Yeah.
your name can't be something that is already out there because when people look for your podcast, they're gonna come across all these other podcasts, and they're gonna be like, "Well, which one are you?" So
Exactly.
I was like, I have to really go with a new name. And so when I came to this name, it
Mhm.
like really just resonated with me. One, because so the first part of it was part of the reason why, or like one of the main reasons why I had stopped podcasting for a little bit was because I had lost my grandfather. And it was in November of 2020. And
I'm
so
sorry.
I just thank you.
Mhm.
And it was really hard. It was tough. And
Mhm.
I didn't really feel like I was in the headspace to
Yeah.
really create anything at that point. And then when I tried to get back into it, I was like, you know what, let me still just chill, take a
Yeah.
break, and like figure out what it is that I am doing with my podcast, what it is that's going to set my podcast apart. Because initially where I was going with the show was I wanted to just talk about issues that like I cared about. Like I just wanted to talk about different things. And I felt like it was kind of serving like an open diary, but I'm like, there has to be more to it. Like I
Mhm.
know after a while, like talking about things that bother me in the world is going to drain me after a
Mhm.
while. And I need to figure out like where can we find like positive, like the
Right.
positivity in it, like what can be uplifting from these conversations. So while I was trying to figure all that out, uh,
Mhm.
when I heard that name, it originally resonated with me because not just the loss, but even thinking about like what we're doing with the podcast and like thinking about the old way of doing things with the system of incarceration, because spoiler alert, that's kind of like what the podcast mainly focuses on is issues of incarceration. um, and that I thought for me symbolized the grave, but then the
Mhm.
garden part of it was how could we reimagine and re-envision a new world beyond prisons and a new world that can be shaped in a different, or even activist movements and advocacy. How can we think about that in a way that is creative and inspiring? And that is the art and the artists that I work with and I have on my podcast each and every episode. I feature
Yeah.
artists who are like engaging in work that is transforming their community and transforming the way that we can think about our interactions with
Yeah.
the legal system. So I felt like the grave was like that old way of doing things, and then the garden was the new way in reimagining this new world. And then also, again, it's like kind of like how that break also happened. It was like
Mhm.
2020, and then it felt like the podcast was dead. Like I literally felt like that. And then it
Wow.
now coming into its new self and its new being, it's like that was also the garden, was that it wasn't dead, it was just buried and it was planted.
Yeah.
Now it's blossoming. So yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thank
Yeah, I
you.
love that. That is beautiful.
Thank you.
And yes, spoiler alert, in
Yeah.
terms of what the podcast is about, but I was thinking about it and I haven't come across, I would say I do listen to quite a bit of podcasts and yeah, yours is very, um, what's the line? It says, um, where social justice and art meets. And I love that
Yeah.
because, as an artist myself, I know of the social justice aspect of things that I personally like to touch on from time to time as an artist. So I was curious, do you feel that it is a necessity for art and social justice to meet? And do you think it should meet more often?
Oh, absolutely. And it's crazy because like even when I told people about like the new vision for the podcast, some people, especially if they're not really that into the arts, were kind
Mhm.
of like, I don't really see the connection. But all
Mm.
the different people who I've connected with have like, I feel like at this point, because I had so many different artists on the podcast and like so many great work that's being done, people are like, yeah, I never would have saw that connection before, but now I see the importance. And if we're just thinking about even like in schools, for example,
Mhm.
and how in schools, like how important the arts are in school systems and how transformative that is. One of the people who were on my podcast, one of the gentlemen, he talked about being connected with this art group that eventually led him to rebuilding a church. It's like,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's like the way that arts is like kind of like the gateway into so much more. But it also serves, for me, the way I'm seeing it now is that it serves as a new way of thinking about things.
Mhm.
Like it doesn't like our protest movement,
Mhm.
like protesting against systems that we don't necessarily agree with, don't have to always look like marching in the streets. They don't always, because sometimes that isn't what you're maybe into, or maybe that isn't something that you have access to do. Like,
Right.
say, like when it's the pandemic hit, some people just couldn't be around other people. So
Yeah.
it's like, how can we re-envision and reimagine and what that approach could look like? I feel like the arts really does provide a new way of really thinking about that and thinking about justice and our interactions with justice movements. So I feel like it definitely needs a space in the conversation around advocacy, activism, and justice movements.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And
Mhm.
also, I think the arts provides wider access. So I
Exactly.
can be listening to a song or looking at an artwork from anywhere that evokes something in me to want to be a part of change or a movement or something bigger. So
Yeah.
the connection is very important and very much there. And
Mhm.
I'm glad that you're connecting the two.
Thank you. Yeah. And
Yeah. So
I feel like you definitely do the same too, like with your music, how you mentioned, like you talk about it in your music. And I think that there are so many people that are doing it, but I feel like because it's not being connected often, or we don't see that, like, and I think that's where my podcast is serving as that space where it's like, here are a bunch of people who are
yeah,
doing the work already. Like, here are way, and it also provides a way for people to see, like, well, what could my activism look like? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be like me just signing a petition and feeling like I just signed a petition and I didn't, and there wasn't much impact behind that.
right.
It inspires and sparks creativity in a very new and different way. And so many people are doing that. It's just, I think sometimes because we don't hear about it all too often,
Yeah.
we don't see the impact enough. And that's why I was like, it's important to have a platform that really speaks to that, because then people will see that it's already happening and it's out there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly, and we can create even more of it.
Yeah.
So, as you mentioned, the podcast, centers around incarceration.
Mhm.
What about incarceration was something that you felt that you needed to be a centerpiece of the podcast?
Yeah, so when I was an undergrad, I used to
Mhm,
be a part of this organization, and it's called Bonner Community Scholars. And
mhm,
what they would do is they would have, well, they would recruit in, if you were a freshman, sometimes you would be older, but most of the people they would have recruited in were freshmen.
mhm.
You would have to do 300 hours of service each year.
Oof,
It was a lot.
hours,
School and everything.
hours. Yep.
Um,
So
but
that's real commitment on your part.
yeah, no. So it was a lot of work, but so they had different sites that
Mhm,
you could be a part of. And the one site that I saw that I had never really interacted with was the
mhm,
juvenile justice site. So you could go
mhm.
to prison, jail, and reentry. And I was like, that's the one I want to be a part of. That's my number one pick. They put me on a different site because they were like, we feel like you should be with kids. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm still gonna tutor in the prison anyway. And then I like forced my way onto the team. And so I feel like through that experience of just
Mhm,
tutoring in the prison and getting to know people, um,
mhm,
and one of the things that like really struck me was when it was like the very last day of our tutoring session. Oh, I was sitting around, like, it was like
mhm,
we took our chairs and made it like a circle. And so there was a few of
mhm.
us just sitting around. And one
Yeah.
of the guys had asked me, like, well, what was your first impression when you came in here? Like, what did you think? And like, what did they say? Like, what did the guards say before you came in? And I was like, honestly, like, you're going to show me who you are. Like, I
Yeah.
chose to give you that chance to show me you rather than let somebody else shape your narrative.
Mm,
But the reality was that the guards did, and like, and I don't think it was meant. I mean, I have a bunch of feelings about this, but I don't think
mm,
that they meant, maybe they did mean harm, but I don't think that they meant like serious harm by what they were doing. I feel like they thought they were doing the right thing by like
right.
preparing people to be inside
Yeah.
the prison, especially if you've never been before. Um, but they did say like the guys were going to manipulate you. They were using words like they're going to try to like get you to be where they are. So like if they do one wrong thing, let us know, we're taking them out the course completely. They won't be getting their education at all. And like
Wow.
something about that just never sat right with me, because my thing was that if I thought about my college courses,
Yeah.
and they said one thing too, that if one of the guys were to hit on you, to let them know, because if they hit on
Mhm,
you, then they're going to be removed from the class. I'm
Mm.
just thinking back to my college classes. If a kid in my class who I just didn't want to talk to was hitting on
Right.
he wouldn't be removed from the class completely and not have access to his education. So I
Right.
feel like I don't really think that that's right. Like I
Mhm.
don't know, something with me, like it didn't sit right with me. And so I shared
Right.
that with them. Like I was just like, yeah, like they did like, try to like scare us like
Yeah.
into like and I guess in their eyes it was preparation for what
Right.
we can experience. And also probably protecting us like so that we didn't feel like we're being harassed,
Mhm.
so that there is somewhere to turn to and that there would be action steps taken. But I felt like there's very limited agency for them to be able to shape their own narrative. And that
Mm.
bothered me. And so I was like, and the more I continued tutoring, the more I continued working in the prisons and with people who were system impacted, the more I realized that the agency was so limited. And so then I was like, I wanted to do like, I did a few projects around
Yeah.
this later on. Um, but I always wanted to have my projects be able to tell the story, like someone else tell their own story, not me telling your story, not like it being like me reading a book and taking it secondhand from someone else. I wanted people who were incarcerated to be able to tell their stories. And so that's
Right.
like kind of like why the incarceration piece, it was literally that experience. Um,
Mhm.
and then it transforming into what it is now because I was a
Wow.
media studies major. So it
Mhm.
was like wanting to like give people the mic in a way. So it's not me
Mhm.
holding the
Okay.
mic and just telling it, it's giving
Yeah.
it to someone else and them being able to just say what they want to say in their most authentic, true self.
Wow. That is really powerful. And that's interesting. So do you feel like, because I can't say most, but I'm sure a good portion of people, and I'm sitting here now, like, have I been guilty of that ever in any way? Like, um, I think that I'm a fairly open-minded person where I'm wanting to know what led to someone's actions.
Mhm.
And do you find that, yeah, when you were speaking with, um, was it gentlemen? Was it a mixed group of,
So the prison was only men.
okay,
It was a men's facility, I should
okay,
say. The jail that I was at was both women and men, and
okay,
so it was mixed population, and then I did a reentry program, and so the reentry program had, like, all different people in with that.
gotcha.
Mhm.
And were you finding that a lot of them were saying that they felt as though people didn't want to give them that grace and it was just this assumption? Maybe some of the guards had it too, where it was like, well, they wouldn't be here if they were good people anyway. So do you
That's
think maybe that's a part of, because that's an interesting dynamic. Well, if a lot of people, I actually, a line that bothers me a lot is when people are like, well, don't do the crime, you can't do the time, because that's such a nuanced statement, and it's sometimes it's not so clear cut as to what led. It's not excusing the action, but
Mhm.
the fact of the matter is there are also different things that
Lead.
played a role. So I mean, I just find this topic very interesting. Do you think that's a part of why you wanted them to be able to tell their own story, because people want to speak for them, people already have made up their mind, people are already saying, well, yeah, you wouldn't be here if you were a good person anyway.
Yeah, no, honestly, I remember one time and, like, when you brought up correctional officers, one, I'm not bashing correctional
No,
officers,
sure.
like, because to be honest, like, I do recognize that that must be a very tough profession, especially being underpaid, yet prisons make so much money in revenue
That's
than
another topic, how much money
yeah, like, but,
is just,
like, whatever.
it's
Um
a lot of money.
yeah, but this one I remember this one time I was in the jail, and I forget what the pod was called, but it was like where so like different units are called
Mhm.
pods, and well, at least at that jail in New Jersey.
Okay.
And though I was in the medical unit essentially. And
Mhm.
so people are in the medical unit if they need help or if they need to get medication. This one guy in the medical unit, I was tutoring him and
Mhm.
then he got his medication and then but and the correctional officer came over, gave him his medication,
Mhm.
left. And then once the session was over, I left and I was like waiting for some of the other Bonners to come through because that was the
Mhm.
organization, it was called Bonner. So I
Okay.
was waiting for some of the other Bonners to come through. And the correctional officer who had given him the medication was like, I saw you were working with this guy, the name that he mentioned
Yeah.
guy. And he was like, how was that? And I was like, I mean, it was fine. Like we
Yeah.
were doing math, like it was just fine. And he was like, oh, I can only imagine. Like, how did you try to get through to him? What you had to say, like, if it was math, this gram of crack plus this gram of crack equals.
Oh
And I was like,
no.
did he just say that to me? And I was like, well, no, I just did, like what we had on the sheet, just,
Yeah.
I gave him normal, like and I don't even remember what I said, but I was like, no, like I did exactly what was on the sheet and like
Yeah.
talked to him like a human, like that was it.
Oh man.
And he was like taken aback when I said, like, because I do remember saying that I talked to him like he was like, another person.
Yeah.
The guy was like taken aback, like, oh. And I'm like, yeah, like you're like, I'm at that point, I'm probably 19, and
Yeah.
you're, like an older man. Like, come
Right.
on, like this is your
Oh
job too. You work
man.
with people every day. You work with the
Yeah.
same people every day. So even that interaction and like the way that the correctional officers, whenever there was a movement, the way they would scream at the guys, I
Oh
was
man.
kind of like, I could tell, like, and it's like the story, like it's almost, I don't know, like they didn't have, and then the people would say, like the people who I worked with, they would say that they didn't have the ability to just share their stories or tell their story. Um,
Mm.
but even in those interactions, even with like correctional officers and things like that, it was just kind of like, yeah, no, this isn't,
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
what it's about.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
And I
what
would never forget that.
I mean, I wouldn't either. That's like that's wow.
And the thing is too, it's like it's crazy because that was none of my business, and I did not know that man was addicted to anything, but
Right.
me just throwing it out there, it's like that was none of my business, like, honestly,
Right.
none of my business. And,
And
like, why
wow.
to bring that up, you know?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It's so that's interesting. And that's another part of the because it just what you're doing, um, yeah, it allows people to at least look at it from a perspective that they might have not have been willing to look at it before. And I think in some ways that's the most like my thing is I'm always wanting to look at someone else's perspective. I
Yeah.
might not come out of it agreeing, but I at
Yeah.
least want to try to understand,
Yeah.
you know? So I think that's a part of what you're doing helps to do. It's like I might, I mean, yeah, what you did might have been, but like I can still have an understanding of what led to that, or what have you. So you would say you mentioned that obviously a lot was happening with the pandemic, and and other things in terms of family, and so you took a step back, and then you were figuring out, it was looking like it wasn't going to happen, and so now you're back on track, thank God. Do you feel now that this is your purpose? This is a part of your purpose? Do you see this developing into something, evolving into to what?
Yeah. I honestly most definitely think it's part of my purpose. And that's funny that you asked that because the reason why I even got into podcasting in the first place was literally like in 2020, I was just feeling frustrated, like frustrated
Hmm.
with all the things that were happening. And I don't even think I have to go into detail of all the things that were happening because I think we all
Hmm.
say that. Um,
Yep.
and so I have been praying to God and I had been asking him, like, what is it that I
Mhm.
should be doing? Like, what can I do? Like, what should I do? And in praying, I forget, I had two promptings that kept
Mhm.
to podcasts. And then a friend randomly was like, you need to do a podcast. And I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, so maybe this is it. And then I
Mhm.
remember like I think it was in 2020 or maybe 2021 on a notebook, an old notebook of
Mhm.
mine. And it said that I like I had written back in like high school
Mhm.
that I wanted to do exactly what I'm doing now. And I was just
Whoa.
like, that is weird. And I had completely forgotten
What?
that I wrote that. Like I was just cleaning out my room and I'm like, I don't remember writing this. Like this is so
Wow.
weird. So I really feel like it is my purpose.
Before we wrap this, I think at the beginning of this, we talked about how you're not just this awesome host and producer and founder of the podcast, but there are other things that you do. And you are an artiste yourself. So let's talk a bit. I know we were talking a bit off camera. You have an exhibition coming up, and this is something that's been in the works.
Yes.
So yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So, our exhibition, which is called Clothing Inside,
Mhm.
Addressing American Prisons.
Love exhibits. I am just a fan of all, and there's some about, I mean, for the New Yorkers who are tuning in, I mean, I'm sure exhibits are nice everywhere. I can only speak about my experience in New York and New Jersey since but yeah, it's just something about the vibe, especially opening night, just the whole thing, but like
Yeah, no,
closing night.
I'm really excited. So yeah, no, we do have a newsletter that we've started like probably like 9 months ago. And so essentially what the exhibit is doing is literally exactly what I looked at for my research for my thesis.
Hmm.
My thesis mainly focused on women's experiences with incarceration, um,
Okay.
and looking at it through the lens of clothing and trying to figure out like what people have access to, and
Hmm.
how clothing plays a role in the oppressive system that are in like the criminal justice system or prison
Hmm.
and jails. But we're for this project, we're doing all identities. So it's not just women that we're looking at, it's all people who are
Wow.
impacted by prisons in the US and on US soils. And why I say on the US soil is because one of the people who we're planning to have for a panel, and who's contributed a lot to the exhibit, he was
Hmm.
actually at Guantanamo. So we're gonna have, yeah, so we're gonna have a lot of conversation around that. We're gonna look at labor practices within the uniform. All of the labor that we're looking at is surrounded around something related to clothing or ways of like adorning and dressing up the body. So whether that looks like hair care and haircuts, like that happen behind bars, like cleaning services, sewing services in prison. Um, and we're identifying like or letting the viewers walk through the space and look at those different issues in the space, but then on the outside, pointing them to resources of ways that
Hmm.
they can get involved. And so that they don't just come away feeling like, oh my gosh, this was a lot and I don't know what to do about it. And
Yeah.
like, but I feel bad about it. There are resources that we're going to point our viewers to. So there's going to be that on the outside, all of these different organizations that we've connected with. And like you said, it's been a long time coming because it was 2 years in the making because we were supposed to
Hmm.
show in 2020, but then 2020 happened. So now that things are back to some sort of sense of
Hmm.
normalcy where people can be in spaces a little bit more, now we're going to be showing in 2020
Yay.
September. So in
When, say the date again?
1st. September 1st is opening night, and we'll be showing all through the month of September. So October 1st is our last day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where?
And it will be at the new school.
As I was listening to you, you said, I was like, we were rapping, but you said, I feel like I could talk to you for a while because I don't know, like, it's just really interesting. And I find your thesis to be really, I'm curious to know how you came, like, what made you decide that would be your thesis. And then the other thing, in your thesis where you mentioned women in clothing, are you referring to both how they're dressed and or um, the labor, because how much of our clothes comes from labor in the prison system? I'm sure maybe we can't even fathom just how big that percentage is.
Yeah, so we look at a bit of that too. A lot of the clothing that we're showcasing in the exhibit. So,
Hmm.
like the clothing that people wear, and these are interviews that we're going to be also showcasing in the exhibit. But
Hmm.
so we'll have audio playing. But a lot of the times, the people who are in the uniform, they're the ones who make their own uniform. So it's that weird dynamic in relationship
Wow.
to clothing that you are now incarcerated in but you're also the ones making
Mhm.
it, and but then also you're making clothing for people on the outside as well. So we
Yeah.
do touch on that a little bit throughout the exhibit as well. And the clothing pieces aren't just actual, just like the uniform itself. We're going to have things like shoes, because women had shared that, in one of the interviews that I conducted, a woman shared that the shoes were so tough to wear that they had to put maxi pads on the soles of the shoes so that they could be a little bit more comfortable. Yeah. We'll have handcuffs and shackles. We'll have sanitary napkins because there's very limited access to sanitary napkins on the inside. And that's actually what got me started in my thesis work to begin with, because when I was doing research in undergrad, I came across this comment in my, like, I forget what it was called, but it was like my final project, like I put it on a documentary.
Mhm.
And that for that final project, one of the women had shared that um this was a person who used to tutor in the jail as well with me.
Mhm.
She shared from her working with one woman, she talked about the limited access to sanitary napkins, and that, like, was a light bulb that went off for me, like,
Yeah.
I wanna dive in more to that, and what does that actually mean, and what does that look like?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. This is incredibly powerful. Like, I mean, you honestly, everyone who has the ability to go to this exhibit, please do so. Like, truly, because I'm like, whoa. I mean, it's very eye-opening, and I feel like I'm fairly informed about, but I'm clearly just like, oh. So I feel like even people who
All
think they're
are.
informed need to there's a lot more to learn.
Yeah, I feel like all of us, there's so much more to learn. Even
Wow.
me. I'm always learning new things. Even me, yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Um, tell the people how they, because you're awesome, you're doing amazing things, and honestly, I feel like everyone should be supporting you. Like, no lie. So tell people how they can support you, connect with your podcast, connect with you on social media, all of that.
Yeah, so my podcast is Grace to Gardens podcast. It's literally on all streaming sites right now. Season 1 has wrapped. I'm excited because season 2 is going to be cool. It's going to be like literally the theme around, well, starting off season 2 will be a theme around museums and that work within the criminal justice or criminal legal work. So it's going to be a fun start off to season 2. To find us, you can look on any of those platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, you name it. I'm on all listening sites. The podcast has an Instagram, Grace of Gardens Podcast. And the 2 is a number 2, not TO. And I also have a website. So you can go on to gracegardens.podcast.com if you want to listen there, because I have episodes embedded onto the website, or
Nice.
you can check out like just things about the different people we have on each episode from week to week. I do also have a personal Instagram account that I don't really use as often.
Oh, okay, okay.
But it's just Rashida, like with like I think 4 A's at the end, period, underscore. So that's me if you want to just say hi to me. But I'm always on my Graves to Gardens Instagram account. So definitely go over there if you want to like connect and stay connected. I also mentioned that with our museum exhibition in September, I also have a newsletter that me and one of the co-curators created. So that is Clothing Inside on Substack. So you can go there. I'll have everything, like I'll send you all the links in
Yeah, I
case
was just gonna say.
yeah, like
Okay.
have the links to all these different things, but there is a newsletter with that, and we'll be having a website which will be coming shortly. So
Hey,
everywhere where you can find me for the most part.
nice. I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. Yeah, you are awesome. You're doing amazing things. What would you closing? What would you say to anyone who is looking for purpose, or they maybe are scared, they're not sure? Like, how do you think someone knows when they're operating in from a place of purpose?
Um, so I think I mentioned this earlier that I'm Christian,
Mhm.
and for me, the best way for me to figure out purpose was literally being connected with God. Because like I said, that notebook that I found, I would have never remembered and been drawn back to something that I was so interested in such at such a young age. And
Right.
he put that on my heart from the beginning. And I
Wow.
literally completely forgot about it until I came across that notebook. But that was after I had started already working in my purpose and walking in my purpose and following exactly what he told me to do. And then he had me come across that notebook. That was
As
really
confirmation, that's beautiful.
exactly. And so I feel like purpose, honestly, like for me, I believe our purpose was to be in like connection with Christ and with God. And so that is the number one thing, because then once you know who you are in him, then you know that you're not operating from a place of always having to do to perform for other people. You're not always having to like try to figure it out on your own, because if you're always having to figure it out on your own, what if something that's out of your control happens? Like when my grandfather had passed away, that literally almost like knocked me off completely, that
Wow.
I didn't even want to do it anymore.
Mm,
Because he was also really supportive of my podcast too. Like he was like
mm,
so geeked out over it. And
yeah.
I like almost didn't want to go back to doing it, but I knew that it wasn't about me. It was about, and
Mm,
it wasn't about anyone else and their approval of it. It was about doing the thing that God had called me to do. And so I feel like when you first get in connection with God, then all the other things just start to flow from that. And that literally, it comes from his word. Like he literally says to just be with him, to know him, and then all the other things will soon follow. And because he cares about every single one of us, like he loves us, he cares about us, he knows what we need, and he wants to make sure that we have more than enough, because he has
mm,
enough. So if you
yeah.
are just always connected and staying connected, and then once you get to that point of, okay, I know what it is that I'm, where my imprint and where my impact is, once you figure that thing out, then don't focus on anything else, and or anyone else, I should say. Don't
Yeah.
focus on comparing what other people are doing,
Mm,
because if you're always on Instagram and looking at like, oh, well, this person is doing this, or this person may be doing it better than me, it's like, then you can get in your head and you can get so overwhelmed, and that can discourage you from walking in the thing that you're doing. So stay focused, and stay focused
yeah.
on the thing that you know that you've been called to do. And when you do that and you do it well with excellence, once you do that, then all the other things will just come naturally. Like even this exhibition, I would have never have guessed that I would be doing this had it I not have already started walking in my purpose and being intentional about what I've researched and where I put my effort and energy into. So it's literally all about the connection to God and knowing who he has made you to be. And then
Mm,
so many other things will come from that. So yeah.
yeah. Oof.
Yes.
Sums it up perfectly, and why I just feel this need to showcase and highlight and speak to people who are doing just this, walking within their purpose and their calling. So thank you. Keep up the good work. And yeah, everyone connect with Rashida. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for your work, because it's incredible. Like even just focusing on purpose, like people don't always want to do that, but that's important to highlight, and highlighting how people are doing that. That's incredible work. So thank you so much. And thank you for this.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you.
Alrighty.